I look to your bylaws. There are some bylaws that have been amended to have a parallel or a similar procedure as in a condominium, but that's not the norm. So for an HOA, you still need a quorum to have an election unless your bylaws have adopted what I will say, a condominium style election. I don't know what these bylaws say. I'm making an assumption, which is a bad word to do. I'm making an assumption that they're more of the older fashioned, where you need a quorum of 30%, and then you have to go from there.
Yeah, I had a follow-up question to that, related to that. If we are one of the older HOAs where you need a quorum, so we usually ask for proxies because we never quite get the quorum present. So people are familiar with that. But what happens if the proxies are all made out in the name of someone who then doesn't attend the meeting?
That person, if that person can't attend the meeting, I haven't seen the proxies. Many proxies have what's called the power of substitution. Okay. Where the proxy holder, let's say it's me. Okay, just use an example. I've been named as the proxy holder for, 50 owners, just to use a number. And I can't make the meeting for whatever reason. I don't want to go, or I can't go, or whatever. If the proxy has what's known as a power of substitution, then I can substitute anybody else as the proxy holder. I could substitute you or Mark. Why I would pick Mark, I don't know, but I could substitute, someone else. Now, without that power of substitution, that's a real problem because, the proxy holder, whether it's the original one or a substitution person, needs to participate at the meeting.
Right.
And, Dave, a couple things I would say. First of all, you mentioned it was that it was too late to do, some sort of an online meeting. I don't know that that's the case. I mean, certainly a Zoom meeting and something like that can be set up pretty quickly. And it wouldn't be that expensive. I think I guess what I would say is I think there's going to be some allowances made in your process for issues like this, so if you guys, even if your bylaws didn't specifically allow for the mail-in ballot type situation, I'm not so sure that, given the current situation relative to meetings and right now where we're at, that you couldn't using emergency powers adjust that. Obviously at the presidential level, they're saying you can do that. So, that's really the argument there at that level. Can you change those things without the state legislature making changes? And that's kind of the same thing here. And in general, it appears that the courts in general are allowing some guidance and leeway, or not guidance, but some leeway on allowing people to do things under emergency powers. But so I don't know that and the proxy situation, if you've got proxies, that may be the best way. Just encourage vote by mail. Have everybody do the proxies, or encourage them to do the proxies if they're worried. Tell them we're going to set the meeting room up with, socially distant, but we're going to limit the attendance in person to how many ever your room can hold without being too close together. And, and then do that. And I think that something like that is a little better than just letting it go. Even if you didn't have an election, I wouldn't hold off until the next year. I would, I would postpone the election and have it, and then have a special election when it was safe to do so. Just so you could do that. But otherwise, I think you guys are wise to consider all of this right now. We've got all these people coming down from up north. They're all starting to come into town with the holidays. We do have a lot of exposure. A lot of kids are back from college and all of that. So it's the community is, I think, going to be overloaded. And of course, I think you probably saw where Martin County was one of the 5 places in the United States that has that new strain.
Yes.
So we're dealing with that. So it's I think it's wise to be to look to see what you can do. But as you know, and because I know you've listened before, I kind of default in the area of letting the people choose. Letting as much as possible, letting your members make the decisions, and I think so. I think if you've got the ability to do proxies and other things, I think you should be you'll probably be okay.
Well, obviously, you should encourage people to send in proxies.
Yeah.
Right.
In order to establish a quorum. Now, when you send a proxy in, that means your proxy holder is then voting for you.
Right.
And even in an election in an HOA, again, unless there's some process for absentee ballots, and the proxy holder is also going to vote in the election. But and I agree with Mark that under these circumstances, even doing it late, I think a Zoom or other platform for a remote participation can be established. Whether that's done, notifying the owners the best you can quickly, if that's the direction the board decides to go because of the problem of having people in person.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think that's helpful.
You're welcome, Dave. And like I say, if you need me to help you harvest any of those proxies, I'll be glad to come out there. I'm offering free vaccines, and we can get a quorum, I'm pretty sure.
Free vaccines. Good luck, Dave.
Good luck, Dave. You're on track. Good job. All right. Speaking of, I'm glad Dave brought this question up because because I'm sure you saw, Peter, or probably you saw before I saw the lawsuit that's been filed in I think it's in Broward County.
Well, there's a lawsuit in Boca.
Yeah, Boca. That's where it's at, Boca.
Where a couple is suing because I guess they both tested positive. The association instructed them to stay in their unit. They deactivated their fobs so they couldn't use the common area. Then they disclosed their names through a lawsuit, I guess, because they filed. I mean, I haven't read the lawsuit. This is only what I know from reading the newspaper.
Yeah, that's what I got. Yeah, that's what I got.
And I guess apparently they said that now there is a qualified privilege for what you put in a pleading. So, and I'm not sure, whether their names were disclosed just through a court pleading, or some other way. I'm not sure about that. But in any event, so they sued. I think they sued for false imprisonment.
Yeah.
Violation of their rights. Again, I just read the newspaper. So I guess it's not unexpected that we were going to see one of these suits pop up. So.
Yeah, it's kind of it's coming down to how far can an association and its board go, because people do have rights. They have rights under HIPAA. That was, from what I understand, one of the big complaints is that the association told anybody that that was tested that if they got their results back to them, and if they were positive, that they wouldn't disclose that. They just wanted to have an idea of what they were looking at within the community, and then they in effect locked them out. They didn't tell them they were going to lock them out of all of the facilities and all of that. So then they locked them all out, and then ultimately disclosed their identity. But I guess when you lock somebody out of the facilities, it kind of tells people that person is positive, because the association made it clear that they were going to, I guess after the fact, that they were going to do that. So anybody whose fob wasn't working, you can probably at least guess that they may have tested positive. So it's a difficult situation. That's what we've been saying on the show here, is that it's just not carte blanche. There are competing privacy acts and laws that protect people from actions like this, discriminating against people because of health. That's the whole purpose of HIPAA, is so that people aren't discriminated against based on their health. And this obviously is going to go down that path of discrimination. And
yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. Again, HIPAA generally applies to healthcare providers as opposed to others. I mean, I tell my clients not to disclose the name of anyone who's positive, but to advise the owners and the residents that someone is positive, that they've been instructed to stay in their unit to isolate for the required time, and that we advise all owners, whenever they're outside the unit on the common area, to wear a mask and to social distance, and if they have any, symptoms or COVID-related symptoms, to contact their own healthcare provider, but not to disclose. And we tell them, I tell my associations not to disclose the name. You can say HIPAA, but also both the Condominium Act and the HOA Act say you can't disclose medical records of any person. I consider that to be a medical record,
right.
In terms if someone wants to voluntarily, without twisting their arm, let the other owners know that they're positive, well, that's a whole different thing, if they volunteer it themselves. But I don't think the association can pressure an owner to do that, or a resident, and nor do I think the association should disclose the name. Now, I know some owners then flip around and say, well, we need to know the name because I need to know whether I was in contact with that person, right? Or I need to know to stay away from, Mr. X or Mrs. X or Ms. X.
And you're not going to win that lawsuit, because that's the HIV lawsuit.
That's why I say basically assume everyone's positive.
Yeah.
And just social distance and wear your mask.
And that's where the tracing comes.
The other argument, but it doesn't convince me to disclose names.
Well, and that's where I say that's where the tracing falls apart, because people don't have to volunteer that information. And if you go and say, hey, have you been in contact with Jane Smith? They've got the coronavirus. You're violating the law. It's interesting. You talk about it being primarily for healthcare workers, but the problem with HIPAA is that it is much, much broader than that. And as you know, for example, if you have a child who's in college, they can't disclose any information. Your kid gets sick or has a problem, they can't call you up and say, hey, your son's got such and such, just want to let you know. They can't.
All I'm saying is some lawyers have argued HIPAA doesn't apply. Okay.
Well,
but I'm just saying that in my opinion, you don't disclose for multiple reasons, whether it's privacy, HIPAA, medical record privacy,
But I will tell you, I don't know those attorneys, but I can tell you HIPAA applies pretty broadly. When I do an audit of a company that is in the medical area, has access to medical records, assisted living, nursing home, whatever, treatment facility, whatever, I have to sign paperwork saying that I have to abide by the HIPAA regulations and that I am HIPAA compliant. And it's funny. A lot of companies were using QuickBooks, and for about 2 years after HIPAA was passed, you couldn't use QuickBooks if you had any medical information or medical records, because QuickBooks was not HIPAA compliant. Now they are. A lot of online places, the computer place that I use for my hosting, my cloud-based system, they had to be HIPAA compliant because they have a couple of HIPAA clients. So it's pretty broad. I was surprised at how broad the HIPAA regulations are.
Well, I guess the bottom line is, for multiple reasons, it's my advice not to disclose the name.
Yeah.
Okay. Or names. And not to pressure them to, quote, voluntarily, unquote, disclose the name themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't, extort them, pressure them, do whatever, but I do think it's advisable, like I said before, notify the membership that there is a positive person. If people figure it out on their own, whatever. But I do not agree with deactivating fobs, to get into the common areas. I don't think these people should be going into the common areas. because they are supposed to, they should be isolating, to the greatest extent they can. But I don't agree with the unilateral suspension of their rights to go to the common area, even though, personally, I think they shouldn't, but I don't think we can just take away their fob.
Yeah. And, the other thing that, that I think that we've got to look at is, I think Governor DeSantis said that there's 4.5 million seniors in Florida, and so that are right now immediately eligible for the vaccine. And I think that I think that associations are going to have to, uh, we've been real lucky up to this point that we haven't had severe outbreaks within our condominium communities. But part of the reason for that is that for the last 6 or 7 months, there's been nobody there. And now there are all kinds of people there. And those people are coming from places that have got, outbreaks. We've got outbreaks here. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of responsibility that an association has. The publicly, the last thing we want is similar to what happened with the nursing homes in New York, is that we created a bigger problem than should have existed. But I wonder, Peter, what authority associations, particularly here in Florida, particularly the beachfront ones that are primarily seasonal, I wonder how broad their authority will be to restrict people coming into the community, if and what kind of authority they'll have to force people to quarantine if they come from a certain place, or force them to get tested. It's going to be interesting to see, because as you and I have talked about for the last few years, whether we like it or not, people are starting to think of condominium associations as more and more quasi-medical providers. We've talked about it with the dementia issues and the Alzheimer's, is that the kids that are up north are kind of figuring everybody in the association is taking care of mom and dad, and
this is a huge problem. And, and you're right, and it's been a huge problem before COVID, because you just mentioned it. Because I get this relatively frequently, quite frankly, where a resident, usually an elderly resident, is apparently mentally incompetent, or having severe issues. Okay. And it's almost as if the children, the adult children, kind of just, I hate to use this word, are kind of like dumping them in the condo, right? And as you said, relying on the association to deal with it. And the association is not, a nursing home, and it's not a health provider. Yet, these individuals sometimes pose problems to themselves and to others. So now you're going to layer this, the COVID issue on top of, the already existing issues. This is a huge problem. Do I think the association can prevent owners from returning to their units? No. Okay. If they're coming from hot spots, well, Florida's a hot spot, for crying out loud, but if they're coming, from hot spots, can they force them to quarantine? It's very difficult. DeSantis doesn't have that anymore. He did, I think, originally, there was an order that people coming from New York back in the beginning, when, that was the epicenter, and the rest of the country wasn't as bad, people coming from New York were supposed to quarantine. But you said that's very difficult for an association to enforce.
Right.
I do think associations can continue, and I don't know, the emergency order was, I have to double check it myself to see whether that's been extended. I'm assuming.
I think it was for 60 days. I think it's still
since I was out of the office last week.
Okay.
So I still think associations can exclude guests and visitors, other than non-essential contractors. Can they require, let's say, an owner or a tenant to have a negative test? Probably not. I mean, you can always try, but again,
I bet you they can with a tenant more than with a. I bet
well,
you.
a tenant more than an owner,
Yeah.
okay, but but it's still not. That's still not clear.
I mean, I think that they could make that part of the. I think they could make that part of an application process, because you do have the ability to screen tenants for a number of things, and I think that that can be one of them. I personally think that you could that's valid in the situation that we're in now, because you're sending somebody into a community who they may
It's
not
definitely
be 65.
well, it's definitely more possible than an owner.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I think the owner is going to be tough.
That's for sure.
But I think that the associations and I'm kind of leave me alone kind of person, but I like voluntary stuff. I'm a big fan of voluntary stuff, and I think associations should be proactive in this area, and by not forcing people to do things, but making it very easy for them to do it. For example, right now, anybody 65 or over is eligible to get the vaccine, right? And they're being administered in certain places. For example, in nursing homes and assisted living facilities, they're being administered by pharmacies. I see no reason why you couldn't go to a pharmacy as an association. Go to a pharmacy and say, we'd like to have a vaccine day. And can you set it up to, a time where you can be out here for a day to give everybody vaccines that wants it, and not it's mandatory, but then it's there, and they don't have to worry about going out someplace or whatever. I know a lot of people are worried about going someplace to a medical facility to get it because they're worried they're going to get it from the medical facility. So I think there's something that I could see them doing. I could see setting up a voluntary testing type thing, or making testing available. Because as much as they tell you you can go get tested easily, you cannot. I went through that process recently because I had potentially been exposed. Now, under the guidelines, I was not exposed because I was not within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes. So technically, I was not exposed. But the holiday was coming up. I was seeing my kids, grandkids, and all that kind of stuff. And so, so I, when I found out about it, I called Cleveland Clinic and to set up a time to test. Well, first of all, they wouldn't test me until I had symptoms for 5 days, because they said you don't have a big enough viral load yet to be able to necessarily test. So they wouldn't test me for 5 days, which was, by the way, the day after Christmas. So I had to quarantine through the holiday because I couldn't get a test. And then they also told me, even though I had been exposed, even though I had some symptoms, that technically I probably didn't meet the qualifications.
Well, I'm kind of actually. I'm gonna interrupt there. I'm a little surprised because I don't know, about 2 months ago, I thought I might have been exposed, and it wasn't even that as sure as yours, because the person that I thought I might have been exposed to had no idea that whether they were positive or not. And I just went to an urgent care place near my home and just got tested. I mean, there was no qualification, there was no
and
anything.
that's still the case. And in fact, just recently, I had a couple of people that ended up going to one of those and get tested. But the problem with some of those facilities is that the test that they're using is still turning out false positives and false negatives. And so, you almost have to do it twice. Some of these tests aren't, and it is because some of that is because people go too early and they don't have the viral load to be able to register. And so, that's the other issue. That's why they get some false positives or false negatives, and particularly false negatives, because they just don't have enough of the virus yet to register. But I went through that process, and then I finally got tested. The interesting thing is they told me it'd take 24 to 48 hours to get my results. They actually got me the results back in about 7 hours, which wasn't that bad. So by Saturday night, late, I had my result back, which was negative. But there again, I still ended up having the whole weekend, and I ended up quarantined Saturday and Sunday, and then so I guess what I'm saying is, if an association can arrange for it, it would be fantastic. Both the vaccines and some testing, and actually even some antibody testing. That would be another thing that would be nice, because one of the things that I'm starting to find, just from my own experience, and it might just be a small sample, is that this thing is in most people is a lot milder than everybody thinks. And I think people are thinking, I don't have it because I'm not struggling being able to breathe. I can't, I don't have to go to the hospital. I'm not that, I've just got a cold. And it's turning out that it's not just a cold. It's turning out that it is the coronavirus. And so you're not asymptomatic, but the symptoms aren't as bad as people think they're supposed to be. So they don't think they got it. They think they've got a cold. And that's going to lead to a tremendous amount of spread. And a lot of elderly people are going to get it worse. They are. But just because you're elderly doesn't mean you're going to get it worse. You know what I mean, Peter? So I don't know. I just so I think associations could be proactive here and start setting up some voluntary things to allow. And when people start seeing that other people are voluntarily doing some of these things, I think they'll be more willing to participate if somebody gets sick. Say, hey, I've got it. I was down at the pool the other day, and I was talking to Jane for 30 minutes about something. Or, my wife was gone, so I was stooping Sally. And so, I make a joke, but did you hear that is one of the issues that they're talking about, is that with the tracing is an issue, because some people don't want to admit who they were with for periods longer than 15 minutes, so I think
no, I haven't heard that, but
yes.
I guess I can see it.
So anything voluntary we can do, to get it out there, I think will be really, really helpful. And that's where I think that's where the Boca Association made the mistake. They became very dictatorial. The other thing is, and it's like I said before, ask your members. Every vote doesn't have to be an official vote. You can ask people for information. If you're an association, send out a ballot, a survey, whatever you want to call it. Doesn't have to be official, but send it out and ask people, would you want us to do this? Would you want us to do this? How do you feel about access to facilities? What do you want us to do? And see what kind of response you get. There's nothing wrong with asking people. For some reason or another, we think once we become the president or whatever of a condominium association, that we're all of a sudden we can't ask anybody any questions. We're supposed to know all the answers. Well, ask questions. This is one of those kind of things where it helps to have input from from your members. And like this situation in Boca, I can guarantee you that if that person had participated and said and that association had voluntarily agreed, that they were going to do this, I think they'd have a harder case. The fact that the association said they were going to do one thing and then did another is what's going to cause them some problems down there, I think. So anyway, it's kind of an interesting situation, but I think for the next couple months, I think we're going to be, people seem to not be concerned as much about wearing masks because they think it's over because the vaccine's here. Some people have gotten one of the vaccine shots and they think, okay, I'm good, but they don't have the other one yet. So they're still contagious, potentially contagious. So I think we're going to be looking at some issues coming up. So I think associations, particularly these ones that are primarily seasonal, probably need to be proactive relative to what's going to happen coming up in the next couple, 2-3 months, because they do have a lot of at-risk people that are here this time of the year. So we'll see what happens. You have you Peter, have you heard anything other than this one association? Have you heard any issues coming back from any of your associations?
You mean as far as like a legal action or something?
Yeah,
Like,
or just a significant pushback now on directors, people ignoring, uh, and associations having to take more forceful actions.
well, all through this thing, I've had associations tell me that, there's a certain component of their community that either pushes back or, just kind of does whatever they want. And, they want to, they want to continue to gather by the pool and not wear masks. And, so yes, I've heard that, this entire or this past year. Um, and unfortunately, it's such a difficult thing to police. Um, if there's a group of owners who are just, or a group of residents that stubbornly, don't want to wear the mask or don't want to social distance or just push back on everything, it's tough, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I mean, you can adopt rules. You can, saying that you must wear masks outside your unit when on the common area. You must social distance. Um, but what's the association get? You can institute fining. You can institute suspensions. You can, even bring an arbitration and/or lawsuit depending on the jurisdiction. That I haven't heard of as of yet. I mean, I don't represent every association, so are there any out there that are actually bringing actions against owners or residents? I don't know. I haven't heard of it yet. This case in Boca Raton is the first one I've heard the other way, where the owners are going after the association for, well, in this case, what they claim to be false imprisonment and the confidentiality breach. Do I think we're going to see more? Yes, one way or the other. Whether it's associations taking action or whatever. I think with human nature, people are worn down, tired, right?
Right.
Want to get back, and as you said, people are coming back or have come back. So we'll see. Yeah, I think you're right, although you and I don't always agree on this, but I think at the end of the day, this turns into really one of personal responsibility.
Right. And it'll be,
which is, that's,
yeah, and what we've got going on, and which is a little bit of an issue too, is that for really the bulk of from, I'd say from June maybe on, Florida has been, really pretty unrestricted. We for a long time there, we actually had restaurants open at 100%. We've had a couple of these things. They've still had certain venues that have been shut down and certain restrictions on restaurants. But
Florida's been very, I mean, except for a short period of time, we've been pretty unrestricted.
Right. So the problem is that you've got people coming down here that have heard that, but they haven't experienced it themselves. They've been locked up, and in effect have not been able to do any of these things. And now all of a sudden they're down here and they're free. It's like when your kid goes off to college for the first time, it's a disaster because they're free. They can do whatever they want. And I think we're getting some of that, just people so fed up with wherever they've come from, having a lot more restrictions than we do here, that they're just, they're just, taking advantage of it, I think is what. But here's one of the things that I would say to everybody out there. And again, I would never support mandatory mask wearing. I don't support any of this stuff. I don't support the government telling me what I should or shouldn't do, because they don't know any better than I do, frankly. But I do. I want people to think about this. What if you're the person that carries this virus, let's say you don't get it. And I like I've always said, I doubt very seriously. I have a good immune system. I doubt very seriously if I got this thing, it's going to send me to the hospital, right? But that doesn't mean that I couldn't give it to somebody who it is going to send to the hospital and ultimately to the morgue. So do you want to be that person in your family, in your group of friends, where for the next how many ever years, they say, oh, yeah, Mark was the guy that killed Uncle Joe. I don't want to be that person. I really don't want to be that person. So,
Well,
think about that.
That's why I do support mandatory mask wearing.
But see, the problem with it, Peter, is that everybody, when you start mandating stuff, you start that's not responsibility. That's government. Then government has to police it. This has to come from people saying, look, I do not want to risk the life of my grandmother, my friend, my relative, whoever. And that's really what it boils down to. And it's not.
I know, but some people don't care.
Well,
so what do we do about that?
Nothing. Well, you're going to throw them in jail? You're going to throw them in jail?
You say that. Okay. You say that. And great. All right. It's fine. Someone feels bad about killing someone. They have to live the rest of their life about they killed Joe, or technically or potentially killed someone.
Right.
Okay. But that person who died ain't coming back. All right. So, we do mandate. I always use the seatbelt example. Okay. And there are other health things that Florida is now, I think, the third highest state in the country.
Yeah.
For the amount of, and I know you're kind of downplaying this, but it does kill people. It even kills healthy people. And if 30% of these cases can be reduced, or 40%, everyone wearing a mask, okay, then darn it, let's mandate everyone wear masks.
Okay.
Because you know what? I don't want to have to count on Joe Schmo, own conscious, when look, I don't want to get too crazy here, okay? I don't want to get too political about this, but this country is not in a good place with people acting just, I don't know, out of their minds in all sorts of different ways that, quite frankly, I don't understand. And being so selfish and so ridiculous, where they don't want to wear masks because they think it's some ridiculous First Amendment right, which it is not. You know what? And if it takes government, unfortunately, to step in, then step in.
Well, I can tell you, I can tell you this. There are a lot of things that we're allowed to do that are not good for us. The government can't protect us from ourselves, never have been able to. And that's why, otherwise, they should take cars away from us, because there's a lot of deaths as a result of automobiles.
I just think that's a bad analogy. I'm sorry.
Well, it's an analogy, though. If you're going to try to protect everybody from everything that can cause them harm, you've got to restrict.
I'm not saying that.
I'm
not saying
no,
that.
I know,
we cannot do that. We cannot do that.
Well,
okay,
but
that's impossible. We should have taken away cigarettes
right
years ago. Right.
We should. Right.
Okay. But with a cigarette, for the most part, you're killing yourself. For the most part, with this is such a simple thing to wear a mask, and I think quite frankly, I think it should be mandated. I think it should have been mandated in March, but that's just my opinion.
Well, I disagree, and I'm in that group with that disagrees, and I think that okay. But again, making it clear that I think that it's not about the government telling you what to do. It's about taking some responsibility personally for what happens. And we've all talked or had an opportunity to talk to somebody who, or we know somebody who ended up drinking and driving and hurting somebody or killing somebody, right? They feel horrible afterwards. But the fact of the matter is they didn't take responsibility ahead of time to get treatment, to do whatever they needed to do. And it's the same thing, and that's my point here. You've got an opportunity to do some things that are going to prevent this stuff from getting worse. All you got to do is be responsible. But I will tell you, the associations need to be real careful, I think, about what they dictate, because this case in Boca is a good example. I don't think it's going to turn out good for the association, and I think it's going to come down to the HIPAA stuff. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. But good show this morning. Good calls. We appreciate the call by Dave and getting us started on the subject, because I knew, Peter and I both probably wanted to talk about that subject and then this case. So we appreciate it. We'll be back again next Monday right here on WSTU Digital 1450. We're Martin County's Heritage Station.